Welcome guys to Tapped Into Magic. I am one of your hosts, Logan, and today I'll be bringing you one of my Oathbreaker deck techs that I actually built myself out of one of my commander decks. It used to be my Brago King Eternal, and I wanted to make it into an Oathbreaker, so what I did is I took some of the cards out, put my favorite Planeswalker at the helm, and that is Venser, the Sojourner. And what he basically does is he's going to blink things just like Brago, but not as often, but that's what this deck is about. It's all about blinking objects. So Venser the Sojourner is a 5-drop, 3 colorless, and a white and a blue for a 3 loyalty Planeswalker, and what he does is his +2 is exile target permanent you own, return it to the battlefield under your control at the beginning of the next end step. His -1 is creatures are unblockable this turn, and his -8 is basically a game winner where you get an emblem with whenever you cast a spell, exile target permanent. So his -8 isn't really what we're going for, but if we can do it, we're going to use it, because once we start casting things and blinking things, because that's the name of the game, we're going to be able to start exiling things, including lands, from our opponents. So because this is an Oathbreaker deck, we of course have to have a signature spell, and mine is going to be Ghostly Flicker. So that's a 3-drop for an instant, and it exiles 2 target artifacts, creatures, and or lands you control, then returns those cards to the battlefield under your control. So this is very useful for when we're doing things like blinking other objects, other artifacts, because we can have more uses for them. A really nice thing about Ghostly Flicker is it also lets us do artifacts and lands, which a lot of the cards in this deck don't allow you to do lands until you get a certain card that we'll talk about later, but this gives you more versatility in what you can blink in case you need more of that mana. So getting into the deck, just so that way we get over lands and do that first, we are running 10 plains, 10 islands, a reliquary tower, because we're going to be drawing a lot of cards, so you always want to have something like that, so that way you can have basically an infinite hand if we ever get to that point. We have Terramorphic Expanse. We are running only 2 colors, but this is useful in case we need to go get a certain color, unless we are like island flooded or plains flooded. We can go and get one of those lands, so that way we can help basically catalyze our deck. And then I do just have a Hallowed Fountain in here. It's useful because if you get it, you have both colors at hand. You of course don't need this in the deck. It doesn't make the deck run any better. It's just an alternative option to have in there, so that way you have both colors at any one point in time. So you already know the game. We're going to get into our categories of this Oathbreaker deck tech, and we're getting into the first one, which is basically doing what Venser can do if we don't have Venser. So one of our first things is I took my Brago EDH deck and I made it into a Oathbreaker deck, so that's exactly what our first card is going to be. We have Brago King Eternal, which is of course a 4-drop for a 2/4 with flying, and whenever he deals combat damage to a player, you can exile any amount of non-land permanents on your side of the board and basically blink them at instant speed. So a lot of the cards in this deck only allow you to blink things until your end step. So you blink it and you have to wait until all the way to your end step, where you can't really utilize what the ability is giving you. But with Brago, you can do it instantly. So when we blink some of our creatures in this deck, we can use their abilities instantaneously, which is amazing. So we have other instants and sorceries that allow us to basically do the same thing, and those 3 are going to be Momentary Blink, Displace, Cloud Shift, and then of course Ghostly Flicker is going to be in that bunch too. So Momentary Blink is a really good 2-drop that instantly exiles target creature you control, then returns it to the battlefield underneath your control. So this is just a real quick blinker for one of your creatures that you want to keep on the field in case they're being targeted. Unfortunately, it's only for creatures, so it can't blink things like some of the artifacts that we have in this deck to get a additional utilization out of it. But I think we're just worried about our creatures getting destroyed, so Momentary Blink is always a good instant to have. We also have Displace, which is a 3-drop at instant speed, and this allows you to exile up to 2 target creatures you control, then return them to the battlefield, and this is also at instant speed. So if we don't have Venser out, if we don't have Brago out, then we're going to be able to blink things at instant speed to get our machine rolling again. So that way we aren't ever stuck in the water, we're not just sitting ducks, our deck is always going to be able to do something. And then our last one's going to be that 1-drop Cloud Shift. It's at instant speed. You can exile target creature you control, then return it to the battlefield underneath your control. So that's the nice things about these 3 cards, is that all instant speed. So if we blink something in this deck, like one of our creatures, Peregrine Drake, we can instantly get those 5 lands back underneath our control. We don't have to wait until our end step. Speaking of Peregrine Drake, we'll go ahead and get into that in just a little bit, but I want to finish on these blink cards. We also have some creatures that do kind of the exact same thing, and that's going to be Miss Meadow Witch, Flicker Wisp, and Glimmerpoint Stag. These are all amazing creatures that will never leave you stuck in the water at any one point in time. So if we run out of instants of sorceries, if Brago dies, or if Venser isn't on the field and we can't cast our signature spell, these 3 creatures will allow us to do it at basically instant speed. 2 of them not really, but the 3rd one lets us do it because it's an ability. So we'll talk about that one first, which is Miss Meadow Witch. This is a 2-drop for a 1/1, and her ability is pay 4, exile target creature, return that creature to the battlefield underneath their owner's control at the beginning of the next end step. So this is only you can blink something and then bring it back at your end step. So some of our creatures won't be able to utilize some of their abilities unless it's scrying or drawing, which is still really good. But Miss Meadow Witch does let us still activate abilities of our triggers when they enter the battlefield, but unfortunately it is at the end of turn. So it's not like it puts us back too far, but it is unfortunate that it does have to wait until the end of your turn. Now the other 2 creatures do almost the exact same thing, except they have different abilities. So Glimmerpoint Stag and Flicker Wisp both enter the battlefield, and they allow you to exile target permanent and then bring it back into the battlefield at the end of your end step. Glimmerpoint Stag does have vigilance and is a 3/3, so it's a good blocker for those little guys that will keep him alive. And then Flicker Wisp is also the same thing, except it's flying, so if you're stuck and you need to start getting damage in, you can start hitting with Flicker Wisp in the air. You just have to be careful because he is a 3/1. But if we have something out like Brago, where we can start blinking these 3 creatures, or these 2 creatures, Flicker Wisp and Glimmerpoint Stag, it allows us to continue blinking things, but it is at our end step. But even though it's at our end step, it still allows us to move along with our deck. Now, one of the MVP cards that I have in here, and I would recommend everyone puts in all of their blink decks, whether you're playing this or another type of blink, we do have Panharmonicon, and this is just a beautiful artifact. It is a 4-drop for an artifact, of course, and if an artifact or creature entering the battlefield causes a triggered ability of a permanent you control to trigger, that ability triggers an additional time. So if we have Panharmonicon out, and then we have things like Glimmerpoint Stag and Flicker Wisp, this means that their abilities are going to trigger twice. So if you have both of these creatures out, you're going to get 4 total activated abilities because of Panharmonicon doubling their ETB. So instead of just dropping a Flicker Wisp and Glimmerpoint Stag on the stack, you're getting 4 total triggers. So you can trigger this on 4 different of your permanents. So this does say permanent. So if you need 4 lands for a counterspell or some sort of other ability such as Miss Meadow Witch, this will allow you to trigger it additional times, as many times as you need to. So that's always really nice. Now, our next category that we're going to be getting into is a sort of a control. Because this is blue-white, we want to make sure that our deck is doing things, but our opponents aren't. So what I have here for our first ones is going to be the typical counter spells. So we are running one of the traditional blue, and then 2 other ones that are really good and really useful within this deck. And I have Counterspell, Dissolve, and Fairy Trickery. Counterspell is just a really good 2-drop counterspell that literally counters anything. You just have to make sure you're holding those 2 islands up. Dissolve is a 3-drop, so a little bit more expensive, but it does allow you to scry one, and scrying and manipulating our deck is going to be a big part of what we want to do, because we want to make sure we're getting cards that we need and not just drawing into lands constantly. And then Fairy Trickery is a really good 3-drop counterspell, and it counters target non-fairy spell, which you don't see that often in anything like Commander or Oathbreaker, at least as far as I have seen. And its second ability says if it was to be countered this way, remove it from the game instead of putting it into the graveyard. So it exiles it instead of your opponents being able to put it into the graveyard and then possibly getting it back. So those are our 3 counter spells, and then we have other ways to control our opponent's board. So 2 of the cards that I really like in this deck is actually Reflector Mage and Mana War. Reflector Mage is a really good 3-drop for a 2/3, and it reads, whenever Reflector Mage enters the battlefield, return target creature in opponent's control to its owner's hand. That creature's owner can't cast creatures with the same name until your next turn. So your opponents, when you play this, possibly with Panharmonicon, you can bounce 2 creatures, but when his ability activates, you can bounce a creature to their hand and they can't cast it until their next turn. So they're going one whole turn without casting that creature. So you can bounce something that maybe stops or locks out their deck, or maybe they have a really good creature out that you're afraid of them attacking you, such as some form of Eldrazi, which has happened to me before when playing against Austin. And another really good card that I have right next to Reflector Mage is Mana War. So Mana War is a 3-drop for a 2/2 jellyfish. And when Mana War comes into play, return target creature to its owner's hand. So it doesn't do exactly what Reflector Mage does. They can cast it when it comes back around to their next turn, but it does allow you to get creatures out of your way, so that way you can attack with people like Brago or some of your flying creatures such as Peregrine Drake or Flicker Wisp to get that damage in still. So these two cards are really good at controlling the board. Some of the other cards I have for control, because you do want to keep creatures at bay in case you can't really do anything, is Ghostly Prison and Lavinia of the 10th. These two cards really help at keeping creatures from attacking you. Ghostly Prison, because if you play Magic, you already know how annoying this card can be. It's a 3-drop for an enchantment, and creatures can't attack you unless their controller pays 2 for each creature attacking you. So if someone has a huge board state of 20 creatures, they can really only attack you with as many as they have mana held up. In early game, this is really going to help because not everyone has enough mana out to attack you. But in case they do, if you're playing something such as a token deck, we do have Lavinia of the 10th, a 5-drop for a 4/4, and she has protection from red. That really doesn't matter, but it is helpful sometimes. But her ability is really what we're looking for. So when Lavinia of the 10th enters the battlefield, detain each non-land permanent your opponents control with converted mana cost 4 or less. And what detain basically means is until your next turn, those permanents can't attack or block, and their activated abilities can't be activated. So when you drop Lavinia onto the battlefield, if you're playing against a token deck or even just a decently built creature deck, all of those creatures with converted mana cost 4 or less can't attack, block, or use their abilities if they are activated, of course. So Lavinia basically locks out your player's board and stops them from attacking or even blocking. So if you have a lot of creatures on the battlefield, say with one of our creatures like Blade Splicer, you can pop out a bunch of golems and swing in for a lot of damage because Lavinia is basically arresting those creatures. Now, I've been talking a lot about the creatures in this deck, so I think it's time to get to those. So that's going to be our next category, is basically creatures that really help out. So this is two of the creatures I've talked about a lot so far, Peregrine Drake and Blade Splicer. So Peregrine Drake is a 5-drop for a 2/3 with flying, and whenever he enters the battlefield, untap up to 5 lands. This is really good because you're basically getting a 2/3 flying creature for free, but what's even better is if you have something like Panharmonicon out, you're untapping 5 lands, so that gives you time to get your counter spells ready, that gives you time to get your blink spells ready in case someone's about to exile one of your creatures or destroy one of your creatures, and if you have other things out like Glimmerpoint Stag, Miss Meadow Witch, you can just blink Peregrine Drake real quick and untap a bunch of lands. So this isn't infinite, but it is pretty darn close as we're going to get without being super competitive. The biggest problem that people might see within this deck is that there's not a lot of creatures, and that's not really the point of this deck, is to get a lot of creatures. We're trying to control the board, last for as long as possible, possibly ult Venser, and then kind of win that way, kind of annoy our opponents. But the one way to really get a lot of creatures out to swing in for damage is Blade Splicer. Blade Splicer is a 3-drop for a 1/1, and when Blade Splicer enters the battlefield, put a 3/3 colorless Golem artifact creature token onto the battlefield. And then her second ability is Golem creatures you control have first strike. So she is very delicate. She is a 1/1, but her enter the battlefield ability is so good because it enters, gives you a creature to swing with, and then also gives them first strike. So that's just really good, especially when we have other things out that allow us to blink her several times. We can get a bunch of 3/3 golems. Now, two of the other creatures I have are pretty versatile, and that's Clone and Body Double. These two creatures allow you to basically copy anything, Clone specifically on the battlefield, Body Double is in anyone's graveyard. So if you have things that enter the battlefield and do an ability, Clone is going to be really good at doing that, because when you blink him, when he enters the battlefield, he becomes two different things. Now, Panharmonicon doesn't really help out in this situation, but it does allow you just to use Clone for his one ability only once, which is just important in general, because you can blink him for Blade Splicer, have two Blade Splicers, and then make a bunch of golems. Body Double is really helpful because we are controlling the board, we're putting creatures into the graveyard, so Body Double can enter in as a super powerful creature, either an Eldrazi or a dragon or something that will really help you get damage in, or just help your deck flourish, which is basically the point. So Body Double and Clone are just really good cards just for those reasons. They're probably one of the best creatures and most versatile, in my opinion, and help out the most, because you can also do things like Lavinia. So your creatures are never dead. You always have Body Double in there to really help you out. And we do have a few extra cards that I want to jump over to real quick before we get into the real meat and potatoes of this deck. Two really annoying cards that your opponents are going to hate. This is a category I like to say, I'm back. And that's because it gets you your instants and sorceries back. So you can use as many counter spells as you want, but these two cards are really going to help you out in the long run, and that's Archaeomancer and the Mirari's Conjecture. Archaeomancer is a 4-drop for a human wizard that's a 1/2, and when Archaeomancer enters the battlefield, return target instant or sorcery card from your graveyard to your hand. And the Mirari's Conjecture basically does the same thing, but it's a 5-drop for a saga, and its first ability is return target instant card from your graveyard to your hand. Its second is target sorcery from the graveyard to your hand. And number 3 is it basically copies any instant or sorcery that you play. Its third ability isn't really what we're looking at. Its first and second one is what we want to get to, but its first one is probably the biggest point, because we're going to be wanting to control the board as often as possible. So if we have something like Glimmerpoint, Flicker Wisp, Venser, or Brago out in the field, if we have Mirari's Conjecture and Archaeomancer, we can just start blinking it and get all of our counter spells back. Archaeomancer is a little bit more versatile because we can get our sorceries back, but that's really not what we're looking forward to. If we're going to get any sorceries back, it's probably just going to be to draw cards. But these two I have in this deck specifically to get our control back with our counter spells. So those are the two I just wanted to throw in there real quick, because they're just really important to have if you want to annoy your opponents and kind of lock them out of the game as much as possible. So along with locking out of the game, we don't ever want to be locked out. So we have things that help us manipulate and draw cards. The first one we're going to go over is a staple in all decks that want to draw cards in Oathbreaker, Commander, or any other format, and that's going to be Sensei's Divining Top. It's a 1-drop artifact that lets you pay 1, look at the top 3 cards of your library, then put 1 of them back in any order, and then you can tap it and to just make sure that you don't lose Sensei's Divining Top. Tap it to draw a card, then put Sensei's Divining Top on the top of your library and draw that card. So that's just to make sure you get Sensei's Divining Top every time, and that way it's not destroyed. We do have 2 cards here that let us manipulate a little bit more, Omen Speaker and Augury Owl. Both are 2-drops that allow us to scry. Omen Speaker lets us scry 2 when she enters the battlefield, and Augury Owl lets us scry 3 when he enters the battlefield. So if we have something like Panharmonicon out, we're going to be able to manipulate our deck as much as possible, and that's just really good. So besides scrying, we do have a bunch of draw cards because we want to make sure we're on top of our game every single time. So just to go over a quick little bunch of them, I have a couple. I have Secrets of the Golden City, a 3-drop that allows you to draw 2 cards, but if you have the City's Blessing, you can draw 3. So if you have the City's Blessing, you have 10 or more permanents on the battlefield, which we're going to have a lot of the time, especially with lands. Cloud Blazer, which is a really good creature, a 5-drop for a 2/2 with flying, and when she enters the battlefield, you gain 2 life and draw 2 cards. So blinking her a lot, I'd want to say that Cloud Blazer is probably one of my MVPs because it gains us a lot of life and draws us a lot of cards. We have Seagate Oracle for a 3-drop for a 1/3, and when he enters the battlefield, look at the top 2 cards of your library, put one of them into your hand and the other into the bottom of your library. So this just lets us to draw the best of the top 2 cards. Mystic Remora, which is a 1-drop for an enchantment with a cumulative upkeep of 1. Whenever target opponent successfully casts a non-creature spell, you may draw a card. That player may pay 4 to counter this effect. So no one's ever going to counter this effect, and a lot of your players are going to be casting non-creature spells, especially if you're going up against other blue, blue-green, any other type of creatures or non-creature decks, Mystic Remore is going to draw you a lot of cards. We also have Afara, God of the Polis, a 4-drop for a 6/5 indestructible god. She becomes a creature if you have devotion of white and blue that is less than 7 or greater than 7 or more, I should say. And then at the beginning of each upkeep, if you had another creature enter the battlefield under your control, last turn, draw a card. We're going to be blinking all of our creatures, so of course we're going to have a bunch of other creatures enter the battlefield. And then we do have 2 just regular draw cards, Divination, so a 3-drop to draw 2, really good, really versatile. Shimmer of Possibility is a 2-drop to look at the top 4 cards, put one of them into your hand and the rest on the bottom of any order, so you get to basically get the best of your top 4 cards, which is always just really good. So that's our deck manipulation and draw cards, and so we're going to get into our last category, which is going to be our removal. So we don't want our opponents getting a lot of creatures or having a lot of artifacts that really hurt us in the long run. So I have these 4 really good cards. We have Cyclonic Rift, which everyone knows is the most annoying board wipe in the world. It's a 2-drop to return target non-land permanent you don't control to your owner's hand, and then you can overload it for 7, and that changes each of the target to each. So it's it's an all-sided board wipe except for yours. So it's going to wipe everyone else's board except for yours, which is what you want to keep. Curse of the Swine is an X for a blue-blue sorcery. You can exile X target creatures. For each creature exiled this way, its controller puts a 2/2 green boar creature token onto the battlefield. So this is just really good for exiling creatures that you don't want on the field. We have Active Authority, which is a 3-drop for an enchantment. Whenever Active Authority enters the battlefield, you may exile target artifact or enchantment. And then at the beginning of your upkeep, you may exile target artifact or enchantment. If you do, its controller gains control of Active Authority. We're mainly looking at the first ability because we're going to be able to blink it so we can exile multiple things without giving up Active Authority. So we can get rid of artifacts or enchantments that are really hurting us. And then our last board wipe is going to be Washout, so a 4-drop for sorcery, and it returns all permanents of the color of your choice to the owner's hand. So this will let us board wipe anybody in any certain color. A lot of people are going to be playing double colors, so you can either name one and wipe basically their entire board, or you can kind of save yourself too. If you know that a board wipe's coming, you can call your own colors and bounce your own things to your hands, and then you're allowed to recast them, which gives you more ETB triggers, which is always good and versatile in the end. Now we're going to be getting into the budget portion of this deck. So I do have 3 cards that I did talk about throughout the video, and those 3 are going to be Sensei's Divining Top, Cyclonic Rift, and Hallowed Fountain. Like we talked about in a couple of our deck techs, Sensei's Divining Top is a $30 card that you can easily replace with something like Crystal Ball. Crystal Ball does basically the same thing, except it lets you scry 3. You can't protect it by tapping it and putting it on the top card of your library. But it is a variant that's only a couple bucks in replacement for Sensei's Divining Top. It is a good card. I recommend getting it, but if you can't afford it, then Crystal Ball is always a good way to go. Cyclonic Rift is something that can be replaced by River's Rebuke, can target one opponent on the field. So it only will board wipe one person. So if you can politicize well enough, make sure that your other opponents won't attack you or be upset at you for board wiping that one person. It's a cheaper variant than Cyclonic Rift. It also costs less in money and mana. River's Rebuke is only a 6-drop, where Cyclonic Rift, if you overload it, is a 7-drop. So that's really the only downside to that. But River's Rebuke, really good alternative for Cyclonic Rift. And then at the beginning of the video, I talked about Hallowed Fountain as a land. You don't need this at all. If you want to replace it with a Guildgate, to kind of do the same thing. It'll slow you down just a little bit, but Hallowed Fountain isn't something that you need in the deck. You can easily replace that with just an island or plains if you feel like you need one of any certain color. So that is actually going to be it for my Ghostly Flicker Venser the Sojourner deck tech. If you guys enjoy this, make sure you leave a like down below. Maybe hit that subscribe button if you like some of the stuff that we've been putting out. We should have more videos such as our podcast that you can find on iTunes, Spotify, and Podbean. You can also check out the rest of our videos that we've done before that are also our podcasts on our channel, along with other deck techs and maybe we have some other videos coming out too. So if you guys enjoyed it, make sure you hit that subscribe button, hit that little notification bell, so that way you are updated on our latest videos, and then maybe check out our podcasts that we have done in before. If you have any suggestions that I can make for this deck, or maybe you have a better idea, go ahead and let me know in the comments below, and just let us know how we're doing or what you like, maybe what you don't like about the deck. But I have been your host, Logan, checking you out for the Oathbreaker deck techs. I'll see you guys in the next video.